On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to look at the book of Enoch. This will be our third view of that book. And today we're going to be finishing up the book of the Watchers. There are actually 7 books to the book of Enoch, or 7 scrolls. 5 scrolls with several chapters, and then 2 little appendixes or addendums to the collection. And it has been absolutely fascinating. Today's program sees Enoch take a flight in a heavenly celestial vehicle around the world, and his description is phenomenal. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the Ancient Book of Enoch, Part 3.
J.R., the Ancient Book of Enoch was written for us today. We agree on that. It was written for the latter days, and that was its very intention from the outset. And in the Book of Enoch, we learn things that have a lot to do with the summation of the end of days and the judgment of God and so forth. Enoch is given a guided tour by Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, and in today's broadcast, we're going to look at this guided tour. He apparently is escorted aboard some sort of celestial transportation vehicle that's advanced far beyond anything we can imagine today.
And Gary, as we begin with chapter 22 here, and by the way, we're going to study chapters 22 through 36, as we look at chapter 22, this vehicle is not only a transportation vehicle, but it's a transdimensional vehicle. Mm-hmm. It takes him beneath the mountains to see Sheol, or 4 apartments, it's called here. 4 apartments where the souls of men will be kept after death until Judgment Day. One of these apartments is filled with goodness. There's a light above it. There's a stream that runs down through it. Mm-hmm. And Enoch looks down and he sees one particular soul that's weeping. And he asks his guide, "Who is this soul?" And he is told that this is the soul of Abel. Verse 7 says, "That is the spirit that proceeded from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. And it laments on his account till his seed be destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed disappear from among the seed of men." In other words, Abel will continue to weep until he is avenged, and Cain and his posterity are no more.
Well, J.R., that would include the period in which we now live. In other words, we're still living in a period prior to that final judgment, which Enoch talks about. Things have not been wrapped up yet. The earth is still, as Paul put it, groaning. Mm-hmm. We're all groaning together until that day of judgment. And I was particularly intrigued here in this chapter 22 by the fact that judgment is multi-leveled, if you will. It's variable, and it takes into account the way people lived.
Yes. There are 3 other apartments for the wicked. Mm-hmm. And one is for those who are killed violently.
Right.
And another apartment is for those who did the killing. Mm-hmm. And another is for those who were pretty good people but not saints. So there are degrees of punishment in hell. That's what we see here.
Degrees,
and Enoch rejoices that God is so loving that he doesn't treat everybody the same.
In fact, here in 22:14 of Enoch, he says, "At that time I blessed the Lord of glory and said, Blessed is my Lord, the Lord of glory and justice, who rules all things to eternity." He glorifies the Lord for being a just God who takes all these little factors into consideration.
Yes. Now, he's in this celestial vehicle, and they're moving toward the west. He sees a mountain chain, and the angel that visits with him in this chapter is Raphael. And according to this, he says he sees a mountain chain and 4 beautiful places beneath this mountain chain, entirely smooth, and then he begins to describe these beautiful places where the spirits or the souls of the dead are kept. And so as he continues to move west, they move up out of the subterranean, underground, cavernous areas of Sheol. They're back up to physical earth now, and they're still moving west. In chapter 23, he sees the sunset. And it's rather interesting the way he describes it here.
He does. He said, "And from there I went to another place towards the west, to the ends of the earth, and I saw a flaming fire which ran without resting, and did not cease from its course day or night, but continued regularly. And I asked, saying, What is that which has no rest? At that time answered Raguel," now this is the second angel in the guided tour, "one of the holy angels who was with me, and said to me, That burning fire which thou seest running toward the west is the fire of all the luminaries of heaven." Wow, that excites the imagination.
Yeah. He's looking at sunset.
And
the sun illuminates the moon, so the sun and the moon actually is sunlight, even though it's called moonlight, or the moon reflects, rules the night, but it's still the sun. And so he is looking, and by the way, if he's moving west at 1,000 miles an hour, he's seeing the sun parked on the western horizon,
Right.
and its fires playing among the clouds, and he's seeing a continual sunset.
Well, JR, when our astronauts today go up in the space shuttle, they're moving about 18,000 miles an hour. They see several sunrises and sunsets per day.
Yes.
So this makes it obvious that in this particular transportation vehicle, Enoch is moving synchronously with the traveling of the sun around the world, and you would see a continuous, gorgeous sunset. That would have to be spectacular.
Yes. Now when we get to chapter 24, he says, "From there I went to another place in the earth, and he showed me a mountain chain of fire." So a series of volcanoes here. And at this time he calls it a mountain chain. Gary, from down on earth, it's hard to determine that there is a chain of mountains that runs. But from above, you can see the top of the crest of the mountain that runs, the mountain ridge that runs for miles. And so I would say that he had to be above the terrain to look down and describe this.
Well, JR, in these days of Google Earth, we can just sit down at our computer and we can dial up the mountain chain. We can see the one that runs from the tip of South America, the Andes, all the way up Central America. We can see the mountain chain of the Rockies that runs all the way up into Canada. We can see the Sierras, the mountain chain that runs all the way up into Alaska. But for Enoch in his day to have seen a mountain chain, he had to have a very unique vantage point.
Yes, which certainly speaks for the authenticity of this book.
It does.
Now he says that he sees 7 magnificent mountains, 3 toward the east and 3 toward the south, and the 7th hill was between these. Now to me that's a menorah design, Gary. 3 hills and 3 hills, but the 7th one is described in the 4th position. And so I'm reminded of our studies in the mystery of the menorah, how the lamps on the lampstand of ancient Israel depicted 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, with the servant lamp standing elevated above the others in the middle. And basically we're seeing this 7th hill, and its height is like the seat of a throne, and surrounded with fragrant trees. And so as he describes this, Gary, I'm thinking there is a blue lake atop this mountain that is probably situated in a dormant volcano. And around the shores of this lake is a forest of trees. And so I'm thinking, that he's looking at this, and there may even be a snow cap around in some of these areas around the trees and the forests. And so it would look kind of like the throne of God. You remember in heaven there's this emerald color and the sea of glass before the throne, and the throne looks like hoarfrost, or it's looks frosted looking, a white substance that the throne is made out of. So here he's looking at these mountains, and it just seems to relate to him that it's like the throne of God. And he goes on to say that among these trees He said there was some trees that did not wither in eternity. Its fruit is beautiful. Its fruit is like the vine and the palm tree. And so he asks, what is this tree that's fair and its fruit very pleasant to the eye? And at this time, Michael speaks up. Now, first we had Raphael and then Raguel, and now Michael in this chapter gives him the identity of this tree. Tell us about that, Gary.
Well, this tree is, J.R., to me, metaphorically, I see this almost a connection between heaven and earth. He calls it a throne-like mountain, and he sees here a tree that does not wither in eternity. We recognize this, I think, as the tree of life.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about here, in my mind, and it's so difficult to attach position to this, but it sounds like the throne of God touching earth, almost like the middle lamp in that menorah.
Yeah.
And the energy of the tree of life being transfused to planet earth.
And it is described in the next chapter, chapter 25. But Gary, he has gone from the netherworld, underground, to the sunset, and now he sees these 7 mountains, this mountain chain. Could he have been suddenly transferred to another dimension in heaven? Is this tree in heaven? Because I don't know that the tree at this time is still on earth.
That's what I was getting ready to say. We're groping for a location on earth, but he says here, the seventh hill was between these, and their heights, they were all like seats of a throne surrounded with fragrant trees. That sounds like heaven touching earth, or a view of heaven, if you will.
Yeah.
So now he's transcended the dimensions, and could he be in the location of the place where God will ultimately touch the earth?
Evidently, it's where God has the tree of life. So in chapter 25, he talks about, in fact, Michael says, Enoch, what dost thou ask me concerning the fragrance of this tree, and dost thou seek to know? And Enoch answered him, saying, concerning all things I desire to know, but especially concerning this tree. So he explains to him what this tree is.
We're reminded of Revelation 22, verses 1 and 2, and he showed me a pure river of the water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the midst of the street of it, on either side of the river, there was the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. That's one view. Enoch has a little bit different view. But it's the same thing.
It is. And Michael tells him that this summit of this high mountain is like the throne of God. And it says, is the throne where the holy and great God of glory, the eternal King, will sit when he shall descend to visit the earth with goodness. Gary, is this the holy city, New Jerusalem, he's describing here? It just sort of sounds like
a little preview of the New Jerusalem. I'm struck by one thing, the structure of this. We have the mountains, 3 on each side, 1 in the middle, the menorah, and we know the menorah in the temple stood for the connection between heaven and earth, the place where the Spirit of God touches the earth, and that middle lamp, which Enoch refers to as the 7th, that middle mountain, is the place where the Spirit of God touches earth. So what we've got here is a preview of the New Jerusalem, I think.
Yeah. Now he also says that this tree of beautiful fragrance cannot be touched by any flesh. So it evidently has been removed from the planet after the fall in the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve are still alive at this point.
Yes.
Which I think is rather interesting. He goes on to say, this will be given to the just and the humble when all things are atoned for. So the time of the great judgment. After the judgment, then he said, when all things are atoned for and consummated for eternity, this will be given to the just and the humble. And from its fruit life will be given to the chosen. It'll be planted toward the north in a holy place, toward the house of the Lord. It sounds like it's going to be brought down to Jerusalem. And it's going to be planted. These groves of trees called a tree of life will be planted on either side of a river that Ezekiel says will flow out of the Temple Mount and down across the, shall we say, where, in Zechariah it says that the Mount of Olives will be split in two. And a river will run all the way down to the Dead Sea. And this tree of life will be placed there, according to Ezekiel, and its leaves are for the healing of the nations. It brings life and health, and everybody who lives in the millennial reign of Christ will have no sickness. There'll be no sickness for 1,000 years on this planet.
And it brings heaven and earth together.
Yes.
By the way, it's fascinating in the progression of Enoch. As he goes through this guided tour, we come logically to another stop. And that stop has to do with a stop on planet Earth.
Yes.
In the very next chapter,
Chapter
we
26.
this whole thing is grounded in a particular location on planet Earth.
Yes. I want you to get this article. It's in our April 2009 edition of Prophecy in the News magazine. I encourage you to get it. We started with February, then March, and now April's magazine. And our May magazine will have our next installment on the Book of Enoch. And I encourage you to get it. Just call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and ask for the April edition of Prophecy in the News magazine, or you may want to subscribe. And you can even start with February, so you can get in on the very beginning study of this ancient book of Enoch. If you will subscribe for a year, no matter when you start, whether you start with the May issue or the April issue or the March or the February issue, which we can, get you caught up if you want to. I will give you 4 books. You can have your choice of these, either 4 books or 3 videos. And these books are The Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Plan to Rule the World. They pierced the veil and saw the future. Hidden Prophecies in the Song of Moses, and our book I mentioned a little while ago, The Mystery of the Menorah and the Hebrew Alphabet. This is a $48 value. They can be yours absolutely free with your 1-year subscription to Prophecy in the News magazine. For $34.95, and we'll pay for the shipping and handling. That will take care of the postage to send these 4 books to you and the 12 issues of Prophecy in the News magazine. So I hope you will get them today. Now, if you already have the books, or if you would like to have the videos, they are 3 lectures that I've given before live audiences. There is The Legend of the Holy Grail, a program called Birth Defect, and another one called Job, the Oldest Prophecy in the Bible. And we'll pitch in an extra bonus, the 12 issues of last year's magazines for 2008 on a CD. It's Acrobat's paperless PDF format. You can get them and put them in your computer and read the 2008 magazines as if you were looking at the actual print version. So you can either get the videos or you can get the books. I encourage you to call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and order them today. Gary?
Well, in the next chapter, we've been in the heavenlies, and we come to chapter 26, and Enoch says, "And from here I went to the middle of the earth and saw a place." So we are at a geographical location.
Yes.
"Blessed and fruitful, where there were branches which rooted and sprouted out of a tree that was cut." Now we have here, I think, a delightful riddle.
Yes.
We have a place and we have a tree. What in the world does all this mean?
Yes, there was no settlement there. There were no people living in that area at the time, but we're talking Jerusalem here. He said the middle of the earth. Well, Gary, the Jews believe that Jerusalem is the navel of the earth,
That's
or the
true.
very middle of the earth. In fact, you can spread the map out, just as we have on the wall here behind us. You can start there in Jerusalem, and you can go in 4 directions, toward the north and toward the south, and east and west, and you can find that Jerusalem is right in the very center of the land masses of the earth.
Now, the next verse is the tip-off. Verse 2 says, "And here I saw a holy mountain, and beneath the mountain toward the east, water which flowed towards the south." So we have a holy mountain. Well, that, of course, would be Mount Moriah.
The Temple Mount.
The Temple Mount. It's called Mount Zion. And, J.R., that mountain has been holy from time immemorial.
Yes, it has. And the Kedron Valley in front of it, and the brook Kedron running through there, the little stream of water. And it goes on to say, "I saw to the east another mountain of the same height, between them a deep valley, but not broad. Therein also water flowed along the mountain." We're talking the Kedron Valley here, and the Mount of Olives just to the east of the Temple Mount. Then he says, "Toward the west was another mountain, lower than the former mountain, not high." Now, Gary, that's Jerusalem proper. That's the old, across the Tyropoeon Valley, another hill, before it drops down at the Jaffa Gate into another valley.
That's right.
And we have here, it says, between them a valley. That would be the Tyropoeon Valley, between the two mountains, the mountain west of the Temple Mount. And then it says, "And other deep and sterile valleys were at the end of the three." So these three mountains described here, and right down at the south end of them is the Gehenna Valley. And that's what he's describing here. He said, "I was astonished on account of the rocks, and astonished on account of the valleys, and was very much astonished." And he goes on in the next chapter 27 and calls this valley a cursed valley. And now his guide is Uriel. Tell us about that.
Uriel is the guide. And by the way, these holy angels, J.R., each one seems to have like a field of knowledge. Like they are specialists, if you will. And Enoch says in the very next chapter, he asks a question of Uriel. He says, "Then I said, for what purpose is this blessed land, which is entirely filled with trees, and this cursed valley between them?" So he's got the question we've got. And this goes back to that cut tree we were talking about a minute ago.
The cut tree seems to be Israel.
Yes.
And who cut that tree? They go there, they see virgin territory, they're looking at a tree laying on the Temple Mount, and it's cut down.
Right.
That's dispersed Israel. That's a prophecy. That's a metaphor there of the chosen people that will be kicked out of their land, go into Babylonian captivity, and then go into Roman captivity for 2,000 years, will be without a homeland. And when he says, what's the purpose of this blessed land? That's the Holy Land. That's God's land that he's giving to the Jewish people. And Gary, today, the Palestinians want to take it away.
They do. Now listen to Uriel's answer. Enoch asks the question, what's this for? Then answered Uriel, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said to me, this cursed valley is for those who will be cursed to eternity, and here will be assembled all those who have spoken with their mouths unseemly words against God, and speak insolently of his glory, and here they will be assembled, and here will be their judgment. You know, J.R., we remember Armageddon. The Lord draws all the nations together to that spot.
Yes.
And they speak blasphemous words against the Lord. You know, that's the same image, I think, that Uriel has.
Yeah, absolutely. Now in Joshua chapter 15, verse 8, this is called the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. And from that, Jesus talks about in Matthew 5:22, whosoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hell fire. And the word hell there in English, in the Greek, is Gehenna. So he's using the dump ground of Israel.
Right.
Of Jerusalem, the place where the worm dieth not and the fire is not quenched, as a picture of hell.
And J.R., even as we make this program, right now, the nations are gathered. They're gathered toward that valley, that valley of judgment.
Yeah.
I mean, we're living in that time.
Yeah.
And think about this. Thousands of years ago, Enoch was given this guided tour and shown the time in which we be living today.
Now in chapters 28 through 30 and following through 36, they lift up in this craft and they move toward the east. They're moving out across Arabia.
Yes.
And you know, he describes this as mountains of the desert, and he saw only a plain that was filled with trees of this seed, and water dropped down over it. And it was seen that the water which was sucked up was strong toward the north and toward the west, and all the places in the water, and the dew also ascended from here. In other words, it's a rainforest, Gary.
Yes.
He's looking at a rainforest that today is the desert of Saudi Arabia.
But geologists will tell you today that the deserts of Arabia were once a rainforest. That's a known fact.
And he's describing this rainforest where all that oil, by the way, is buried beneath the sand today, the sediment from the flood of Noah. And so in chapter 29, they go east of the mountains. They see the trees of judgment. They see frankincense and myrrh and cinnamon. And Gary, those are plants and trees that grow in Arabia all the way to India, east of Jerusalem to this very day.
To this very day. And all of those great herbs that had to be imported were imported from that area to the Middle East.
And then they fly across this rainforest and come to the waters of what they call here in the Ethiopian version the Eritrean Sea. Well, everything east of Ethiopia was the Eritrean Sea. You know, that's where the Somali parrots are working today. But in that day, I think from the description here, they fly out over the waters of the Persian Gulf because they turn northward here and go to the Garden of Justice, or in one translation, the Garden of Righteousness.
Garden of Righteousness.
Hey, it's the Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden.
And so they fly across the Arabian Peninsula, the area that was once a rainforest. They get to this sea, body of water. They turn north and go up the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley area to the Garden of Eden, where he sees the tree of wisdom in chapter 32. Gary, tell us about this tree of wisdom here.
Well, the tree of wisdom must be what used to be called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that was the forbidden fruit. And there's a great commentary. If we just had time to complete it, we're running out of time.
Yeah, and Raphael tells him, this is the tree of wisdom for which thy old father, Adam, and thy aged mother, Eve, and that means they're both still alive at this time, ate and learned wisdom, and their eyes were open. They learned that they were naked and driven out of the garden. So he sees this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He describes it like the carob tree and the grape.
Yeah.
And both of those, by the way, are delicious.
They are.
The chocolate made from there, I guess that's where the word chocolate has its derivatives. Well, this is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.